The instruction then was to sit concentrating on the heart at the right side and ask, "Who am I?" When thoughts arise during the meditation, one is not to follow them up, but to watch them and ask, "What is this thought? Where did it come from? And to whom?" To me. And who am I? So each thought disappears when scrutinized and is turned back to the basic I thought. If impure thoughts rise up, they are to be treated in the same way. For sadhana really does what psychoanalysis claims to do. It clears out the filth from the subconscious, brings it up to the light of day, and destroys it. As Bhagavan said, yes, all kinds of thoughts arise in meditation. That is only right, for what lies hidden in you is brought out. Unless it rises up, how can it be destroyed? All thought forms are alien to this mode of meditation. Sometimes a devotee would ask Sri Bhagavan if he could use a theme such as Soham, or I am he, or any other during the inquiry, but he always forbade it. On one occasion, when a devotee had suggested one theme after another, Bhagavan explained, all thoughts are inconsistent with realization. The right thing to do is to exclude all thoughts of oneself, all thoughts of any kind. Thought is one thing, and realization is quite another. There is no answer to the who am I question. There can be no answer, for it is dissolving the I thought, which is the parent of all other thoughts, and piercing beyond to the stillness where thought is not. As Bhagavan said, suggestive replies to the inquiry, such as Shivoham, I am Shiva, are not to be given to the mind during meditation. The true answer will come of itself. No answer the ego can give can be right. The answer is the awakening current of awareness mentioned at the end of Chapter 1, vibrating as the very essence of one's being, and yet impersonal. By constant practice, this is to be made more and more frequent until it becomes continuous, not only during meditation, but underlying speech and action also. Even then, the vichara is still to be used for speech and action, and the ego will try to make a truce with the current of awareness, and if it is once tolerated, it will gradually grow to power and then fight to recover supremacy, like the Gentiles whom the Hebrews allowed to remain in the Promised Land. Sri Bhagavan insisted, for instance, in his replies to Shiva Praksam-Pillai, that the inquiry is to be kept up to the very end. Whatever states, whatever powers, whatever perceptions or visions may come, there is always the question, to whom they come, until the self alone remains. And indeed, visions and powers can prove a distraction, clamping the mind down as effectively as attachment to physical power or pleasure, and deluding one into imagining that the mind has been metamorphized into the self. And as with earthly powers and pleasures, the desire for them is even more injurious than their possession. Narasimha Swami was once sitting before Sri Bhagavan, translating into Tamil the life and sayings of Vivekananda. Coming upon the description of the well-known incident when a single touch by Sri Ramakrishna gave Vivekananda the perception of all things as one substance, the thought struck him whether such a perception was not desirable and whether Sri Bhagavan could give it to him also by touch or look. As so often happened, the question that troubled him was raised at that very moment by another devotee. Echamal asked whether siddhis, spiritual powers, could be attained by the devotees. It was the period when Sri Bhagavan was compiling the 40 verses on reality, the work which, with its supplement, can be taken as an enunciation of doctrine, and he composed a stanza in answer to the question that went, "To abide firm in the reality which is eternal is the true siddhi, the true spiritual power. Other attainments are all such as possessed in dreams. Do they prove real when one awakens? Will those who are established in reality and free from illusion care for such things?" So these spiritual experiences and occult practices are an obstacle to this true spiritual path. Powers and even more the desire for powers impede the aspirant. It is said in the Devakalatram, which Sri Bhagavan translated from Sanskrit into Tamil, "One should not accept thaumaturgic powers and the like, even when directly offered to one, for they are like ropes to tether a beast, and will sooner or later drag one down. Supreme mukti, true liberation, does not lie that way. It is not found elsewhere than in infinite consciousness." To return from this digression, it is not only as a technique of meditation that Sri Bhagavan prescribes self-inquiry, but as a technique of living also. Asked whether it should be used always or just in fixed hours of meditation, he replied, "Always." This throws light upon his refusal to sanction renunciation of worldly life, for the very circumstances which had been obstacles to sadhana were thus converted into instruments of sadhana. And ultimately, sadhana is simply an attack on the ego, and no amount of ecstasy or meditation can carry it to success so long as the ego remains entrenched in hope and fear, in ambition and resentment, in any sort of passion or desire. Sri Rama and King Janaka were free from attachment although they lived in the world. The sadhu who tried to roll down rocks on Sri Bhagavan was bound by it although he had renounced the world. At the same time, this does not mean that mere unselfish action is sufficient without any plan of campaign, for the ego is subtle and tenacious, and will take refuge even in those actions that are intended to destroy it, taking pride in humility or enjoying austerity. Self-inquiry in daily activity, asking oneself to whom any thought occurs, is a plan of campaign, and a very potent one. It may not seem so when applied to an unemotional thought, say to one's opinion of a book or a film, but applied to an emotional thought, it has terrific potency and strikes at the very root of passions. One has been hurt and feels resentment. Who is hurt or resentful? Who is pleased or despondent? Angry or triumphant? One falls into daydreaming or visualizes possible triumphs and thus inflates the ego as powerfully as meditation deflates it. And at such a moment it requires strength and alertness to draw the sword of Vittara and cut through the entanglement. In the activities of life also, Sri Bhagavan enjoins surrender and submission to the divine will side by side with self-inquiry. He compared a person who thought he was bearing his own burdens and responsibilities to a passenger in a train who insists on carrying his luggage even though the train is taking it along just the same, and a wiser passenger puts it on the rack and sits back comfortably. All the injunctions and examples he gave converge on the one point of weakening the ego self-interest and assailing the I am the doer illusion. A famous Congress worker working with Gandhi, Jamnalal Bajaj, once came to the ashram and asked, "Is the desire for political independence correct?" "Yes, prolonged practical work for the goal gradually widens the outlook so that the individual gradually becomes merged in the country. Such merging of the individual is desirable, and the karma is nishkama karma. It has no power. Jubilant, perhaps, at having got the Swami to approve of his political aims and desiring a still more definite assurance, Damlal now asked what seemed to follow logically. If Swaraj is gained after a prolonged struggle and terrible sacrifice, is not the person justified in being pleased with the result? But he was disappointed, as Bhagavan said. No, in the course of the struggle he should have surrendered himself to a higher power whose might must be kept in mind and never lost sight of. How then can he be elated? He should not even care for the results of his actions. Only then it becomes nishkama karma. That is to say that the outcome of one's activity rests with God, and all that one is responsible for is the purity and disinterestedness of it, the desirelessness. Moreover, by doing what is right simply because it is right, without self-interest, one is benefiting others even apart from the visible results achieved, and in a more potent, although more subtle manner than results can indicate. One is also benefiting oneself in a very direct way. In fact, disinterest activity may be said to be the true bank account, accumulating good karma which will shape one's future destiny. In a case like this, when questioned by some visitor, Sri Bhagavan explained that attitude of mind could make social or political activity a valid sadhana, but he discouraged his devotees from taking up such activity. It was enough that they should perform their own functions in life with purity and disinterestedness, doing what was right because it was right. Even though the present state of the world seems inharmonious, it is part of a vaster harmony. And by developing self-knowledge, one can both know this harmony and exert a far greater harmonious influence than by attempts to change the course of outer events. Sri Bhagavan's teaching in this matter is summed up in a conversation he had with Paul Brunton. Will Maharshi give his opinion on the future of the world as we are living in critical times? Why should you worry about the future? You don't even know the present properly. Take care of the present, and the future will take care of itself. But will the world soon enter a new era of friendliness and mutual help, or will it go down in chaos and war? There is one who governs the world, and it is his task to look after the world. He who has given life to the world knows how to look after it also. He bears the burden of this world, not you. Yet if one looks around with unprejudiced eyes, it is hard to see where this benevolent regard comes in. As you are, so is the world. Without understanding yourself, what is the use of trying to understand the world? This is a question that seekers after truth need not consider. People waste their energies over all such questions. First, find out the truth behind yourself. Then you will be in a better position to understand the truth behind the world of which yourself is part. It should be noted that in this last sentence, Sri Bhagavan is using the word yourself to mean the ego, what the questioner at the moment took himself to be. The real self is not a part of the world, but the self and creator of the world. The injunction for the use of self-inquiry in the activities of life was an extension of its traditional use and an adaptation of the needs of our time. In its direct use as meditation, it is the purest and most ancient sadhana. Although it came to Sri Bhagavan spontaneously and untaught, it is in the tradition of the ancient rishis. The sage Vasishtha wrote, "This inquiry, who am I, is the quest of the self, and is said to be the fire that burns up the seed of the poisonous growth of conceptual thought. However, it had formerly existed only as pure jnana marga, that is, the path of knowledge, simplest as well as most profound, the ultimate secret to be imparted only to those of purest understanding, and to be followed by them in constant meditation, away from the distractions of the world. Karma marga, the path of action, on the other hand, had been the path for those who remained in the life of the world and consisted, as defined in the Bhagavad Gita, in a life of service and in acting without being attached to the fruits of one's actions. That is to so say disinterestedness, with no trace of egoism. These two paths are now fused into one, making a new path suited to the new conditions of our age, a path that can be followed silently, in office or workshop, no less than in ashram or cave, with or without outer observances, simply a time for meditation and then remembrance throughout the day. As Bhagavan said, "In the end, all that was hidden shall be made known." Doctrinally, this saying of Christ's, repeated by Bhagavan, is fulfilled by the open proclamation of the ultimate and most secret path, and by its adaptation to our age. This is what Sri Bhagavan has done. Indeed, the new path is more than a fusion of jnana marga and karma marga. It is bhakti, love and devotion also, for it generates pure love, love for the self, the inner guru, which is love of Bhagavan, love of God. Sri Bhagavan has said in the Maharshi's Gospel, "The eternal, unbroken, natural state of abiding in the self is jnana. To abide in the self, you must love the self. Since God is in fact the self, love of the self is love of God, and that is bhakti. Jnana and bhakti are thus one and the same."